Thursday the 5th of October. Nick, can we have Sederunt and apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have 12 members present and 9 apologies this morning. We've received apologies from Councillors Carruthers, Dryburgh, Fairbairn, Ferguson, Hagman, Hislop, Lever, Maitland and Tate.
Thank you. And can I remind everyone present that this meeting will be recorded and that the recording will be subsequently made available for public listening. And if anyone has mobile phones, can you please check and see that they're switched off or put on silent. Declarations of interest, members. Ian Blake, then Jock McKay.
Yeah, item 6, I've been contacted on a couple of occasions by a resident. I did raise an EMAS and put it into the system. David kindly replied to me and I gave that information back to the gentleman concerned. I did not take a position on it and he's also not represented here today, so I have no reason to go out this meeting. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. Jock McKay.
On item 6 again, Chair, I used to work with applicant's father and we're in contact every now and again, so I'll declare an interest and go out at this on this item.
Thanks, Councillor McKay. Councillor Giusti and then Councillor James.
Thank you, Chair. I've got an interest in item 7. I discussed their previous application with the applicant, but I've made no decision.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Thank you. Item 4, I've had contact with residents, but not enough to form a definite opinion.
Thank you. That concludes the declarations of interest. Okay, we come to agenda item 3, which is the minute of the meeting of 7th of September 2017. Is that a true record of that particular meeting? Okay, thanks very much. In that case, we come to agenda item number 4. This is an application to raise the raising of roof heights of 2 existing falcon breeding chambers and 2 flight pens, erection of quarantine building, breeding chamber and guest accommodation, and change of use of stable block to incubator, brooder room and staff room, which is partial retrospective at West Park, BEESWING. This is a... Oh, of course, I now have omitted to get the guidance, but we'll finish this particular part first and we'll get the guidance. The application is a full application. The ward officer declared Eckstein, and before we progress to that, I'll get Nick today the guidance.
Thank you, Chair. The Planning Applications Committee will consider each application in turn as detailed on the agenda. The case officer or other appointed officer will make a short presentation addressing the determining issues accompanied by digital images. Any late information, amendments or corrections will be reported at this time. Members may ask questions of officers following the presentation on points of clarification. The Chair has been provided with a list of eligible representatives who have registered to speak at the meeting within the period specified in Council policy. No other persons will be allowed to speak. The Chairman will individually invite those who have registered in advance to speak to make their presentation, after which they may be questioned by committee members. No questions may be asked of members. The order of eligible parties being heard will be as follows: third parties objecting to an application, third parties supporting an application, statutory consultees objecting to an application, elected members of Dumfries and Galloway Council who are not members of the Planning Applications Committee. Such members would withdraw from the committee chamber after making their presentation. Finally, applicants or their agents. Representatives have been placed in alphabetical order and a copy of the public speaking list is available from the committee officer taking notes of our proceedings. Presentations will be strictly limited to 3 minutes per person, excepting for national and major developments, which by their very nature are more complex, where the time limit will be 5 minutes. The Chair of the committee will ask you to come to a conclusion if you take too long. Representatives are encouraged to use the time allotted to clarify any points they consider material and address the determining issues. Certain matters are not normally material planning considerations and will not be taken into account by the Council when deciding on a planning application. Representatives should not raise any new matters without explaining why they were not raised earlier with the case officer. Please do not repeat what is in the report, as members will have already read the report. After all the representations have been heard, the meeting is then in formal session and no members of the public may address the committee from the public gallery. The Planning Applications Committee will then proceed to determine the application or, where appropriate, agree a recommendation to be made to full council, who will determine the application. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. So we have a full application, and Claire Eckstein is the case officer for West Park BEESWING. Claire, will you take us through your presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just a minor, well, not minor amendment to condition 2. There should be in the final sentence of it, it should actually read, the new buildings hereby granted planning permission shall not be brought into use unless such a scheme as may be so approved has been implemented and is fully operational. So the application site itself lies off a private access road at an existing falcon breeding centre on the edge of the village of BEESWING. The inset in the green, this shows an updated ordnance survey which shows the newly built Henderson Place development, which had been built on the former training centre. This shows the existing development, and this shows the new development with a new breeding chamber building, which is a building to the northeast, a quarantine building, which would be a building to the southeast, and then guest accommodation just beside the dwelling house. And this here shows an illustrative illustration of the proposal which was provided by the agent. Just going through the plans, this is firstly for the new buildings. If you want to see the actual sizes, etc., they're set out in paragraph 1.3. So this is the guest annex. This is the proposed new quarantine building. This would be the new breeding chamber. And these are for the alterations to the existing buildings. So this is the stable block, existing and proposed. The hat pens, or otherwise known as flight pens, which shows the proposed alteration. And then again, breeding chamber 2, and the proposed alterations. And breeding chamber 1, which shows the proposed alterations. So just going through the photographs, this shows the access to West Park, which is off the private road. As you can see, to the left is an access to existing dwelling house, the coppice, and then to the right is sort of lay-by that's been created next to Henderson Place. So we're looking at the existing hat pen in the centre, with the breeding chamber 1 to the right and the stable block to the left. And this shows the stable block subject to alterations, which is why you can see the application is partly retrospective. And the breeding chamber 2 lies actually to the rear of this building. So this is a breeding chamber 1, which is next to the access driveway. And this is showing breeding chamber 1 with the link to the hat pens. I've also highlighted the roof raising element of chamber 1. And this is looking back towards the house with breeding chamber 1 on the so it should be the left, and then the hat pen on the right. And then this is looking at breeding chamber 2, at the back of it, looking towards the stable block. The proposed quarantine building will be to the right-hand side of the photograph. And this is showing breeding chamber 2. And this is the site of the guest annex. I've just highlighted where breeding chamber 1 is, behind the trees, and panning round. So you can see the existing houses, highlighted Mansfield House and the Coppice. And then again, panning right round from the previous photograph with West Park on the left, with the existing parking already in place. This is the site of the breeding chamber 3. This is looking towards the existing hack pen, flight pen from the northeast boundary. That hack pen will be raised with a netting by about 1.5 meters to take up to 6 meters in total. And this is panning right from the previous photograph. And this is a close-up of the breeding chamber 3, which is looking towards the existing hack pen and along the existing boundary hedge. And then this is looking backwards again, so with hack pen behind the photograph, looking up the hedge towards the northeast of the site. And then I've just taken some photographs just from the northeast corner, so this is beyond the boundary hedge, just looking towards the playing fields with the houses nearby, Yarrow Garth, Henderson Close, which is the supported housing for Lawburn, and then breeding chamber 1 has also been highlighted. And again, this is just panning right from the previous photograph. So full assessment of the development is set out in the committee report. As noted in the report, this is an expansion to the existing falcon breeding business on the site by a new operator, and the principle of the development meets with the policy ED2 for business development in rural areas. As the report notes, many of the concerns raised related to the previous owner-operator at the site, and the new operator has noted in their supporting statement, which is set out in paragraph 1.4, the operational differences with their development and the improvements they have included in this proposal. It is considered that the proposal is acceptable on planning grounds, and it is recommended, subject to the conditions noted, to approve the application.
Thank you, Claire. Any questions for the case officer at this moment in time? Ian Blake.
Thank you, Chairman. You mentioned during your presentation that the works, I think it was a stable block, and you saw they'd partially been completed, and that's why it was retrospective. Paragraph 1.3, in brackets at the end, it says some works have commenced, and it refers to raising of a roof chamber. It doesn't really make any mention of the stable block. Could you explain that? Claire?
Well, it was okay. It's just not been included in the report. It was just to give an idea, because I mentioned the roof raising because the applicant's agent had mentioned that was being done as on requirement for a license, to get an import license for the birds.
So just to confirm that the stable works have also been commenced. Is that correct?
You can tell by the photograph, yes.
Patsy.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. You mentioned that the stable block was in here as part of the retrospective planning. Was there a condition put on the stable block? I mean, presumably it was for horses originally, but I just wonder why it's needing a change of use, particularly. And also, the guest annex, you use policy OP1 and OP2, but is policy H3, housing in the countryside, not part of it? And should there not be a justification for why there should be additional housing at this area?
Claire?
Right, just in regards to the change of use of the stable block, it was a stable block and associated with the house, and now that what they're doing is extending it and using it for the aviary business, which is why I've included it within the application, so it becomes part of the business use. In terms of your query about using the guest annex, it is being applied for as a guest annex, so it is not a new house in the countryside. And a separate dwelling house, so it wouldn't be assessed against that policy. Is that what you were getting at.
Well, so it's attached, is it?
No, it's a detached guest annex.
So when's an annex and a house? I mean, I would suggest if it's attached, it's an annex. If it's not attached, it's a new building.
I'll get David to help because we don't want to get bogged down in semantics. David?
I think I've put in 4.4.
Yes, and basically there is an entire policy which we have on that. I'd address member to paragraph 4.4 on page 13, which basically sets that out. To be an annex, it doesn't necessarily have to be attached, but clearly what we are recommending here, for the avoidance of doubt, is condition 1, which ties the guest accommodation to the use.
So it can't later be converted into a house and sold off. I think that's the point that David's trying to make. Elaine?
A lot of the objections are around smell and various other things. Has the applicant given any idea how many birds he would be sighting in this location?
Claire?
I haven't actually sat and counted the number of breeding chambers that are there. I don't know if the applicant's agent's here today and will be speaking later, but maybe I'm able to answer that question for you.
There is an agent speaking, Elaine. He's asked, he did make contact. I've authorised that he will speak at some stage.
Okay, it just wasn't on the list of speakers that we've got.
David and then Jim McComb.
Thank you. Claire, the 3D model pictures went past a bit quick for me. I don't know if was there a before and after one. Can we see them again, please? Thank you.
David? No, you, David. This other David.
Just for a quick comment on that, I did have some hesitation as to whether or not we should use this, because if you look carefully, the perspectives are not the same. So you're comparing apples with oranges a little bit. The existing perspective is shown at a slightly different angle to the proposed one. So, but nonetheless, it's the best ready reckoner we have of an indication.
Okay, Jim.
Thanks, Chair. Page 14, 4.6. The report states that environmental health officers have powers to deal with noise nuisance. Do these powers extend to the situation where the noise in itself is not excessively loud, but it is extremely persistent?
I don't know that would be an answer we could provide today, but David, can you help Jim with that?
Basically, environmental health powers only extend to something which is a statutory nuisance. So there will be things which are below that threshold, which to a degree, some elements of noise are subjective. Some people find noise more intrusive than others, but there is a statutory noise nuisance which environmental health can deal with.
Thanks, David. If there are no other members, John.
Thank you, Chair. On page 7, it says the flight pens will be raised from 4.5 metres to 6 metres using netting. How visually aware would you be aware of this netting? Is there a structure behind this netting?
Claire?
I think probably if I show the existing photograph of the... There we are. That's the netting at the moment. And so the intention is to put netting above that, the green bit up, that'll be 1.5 metres, to raise it up to 6 metres in total. So it'll be an open structure, a bit like the netting there above the green profile sheeting.
Thanks, John. Any other member? In that case, we'll come to the representatives. We have Sarah Colbeck reading a prepared statement on behalf of Richard Colbeck. Sarah, you'll have 3 minutes, and then I'll remind you with 30 seconds to go when to draw that to conclusion. She's going to do her one first, and then read. She's not got in. Oh yeah. My apologies, I missed that out. I see that, Sarah. Yeah, my apologies. So you'll do your own presentation first, and then you will do 2 statements on behalf of others. That's fine, Sarah. So I'll remind you, 3 minutes to go to bring your own into a conclusion, and we'll do the same for each of the prepared statements. So if you have 3 minutes with 30 seconds to go, I'll remind you to bring your presentation to a conclusion. And just whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This application was submitted under the wrong property name and was eventually re-advertised as West Park. It is concerning that once again we see the suspicious word retrospective. Planning conditions are attached to this site, and these highlight the need for conditions to be monitored and enforced. Corrective action is needed to modify or remove the structures in order to set the right precedent. Time must be made available by the planning department for this, or why approve such planning applications. It is unclear who individually or corporately owns West Park. Throughout both the application documents and indeed the summary planning report, there are many inconsistencies, errors and unsubstantiated claims, leading to misdirection, private versus business use, water supply, discharge, noise, vermin, smell. I request clarification on all these points. The application very quickly came to committee, and I feel that more time should have been spent by the planners in requesting, gathering and collating evidence to address points by the objectors provided by the applicant to ensure a more complete report was available for a true and fair assessment. For example, 1. What is the difference in noise created by birds artificially inseminated to those the applicant plans to breed from? The Google search gave a piercing shrill. How many birds will be housed here, an increase from X to Y? It is stated that a breeding project, if they are not for sale, where will they go and how many? If sold, what is the scale and logistical arrangements for transportation? What will the birds be fed? If they are all chicks, rats, where do these come from? Again, transportation frequency is a lot and must be needed to feed all these birds in the extra cages. How and where will all the birds be exercised or hacked? Permission would be needed and should not be near residential areas. Why is a separate application not needed for the guest building, i.e. to accommodate the owner? Considerations to other wildlife and residents. What is the risk of airborne pathogens given proximity to housing and the exposed nature of the site, affecting birds and humans? Correction on the name and use of buildings is needed. It's called an apartment, it's called an annex, it's called a guest block, etc.
You have 30 seconds to go, Sarah.
Thank you for the opportunity to stress these important points, and I hope that a site visit will be arranged. It will be fabulous for you to actually see it for yourselves firsthand and bring it to reality. Whew, thank you, Mr.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Before you progress to the statements, members might have questions for you. Does any member have any questions on Sarah, bearing in mind that the statements you can't ask questions on, only Sarah's presentation today? So does anyone have any questions for Sarah? Do you?
Thank you, Chair. Sarah, you mentioned there was numerous unsubstantiated claims. Can you be more specific on that?
Numerous unsubstantiated claims. Well, the fact that the birds that are to be bred by the current applicant won't make as much noise as the artificially inseminated birds. So how many decibels do the artificially ones create versus the naturally breeding birds is one. And the other, in terms of the smell, how can it be deemed that just by taking away the waste of the food that has been not been eaten, how is that going to improve the smell and also reduces the infestation of rats that we're all faced with in the village now? So that's just 2 of them, and I'm sure the rest of them you can probably look at the report and see.
Thanks, yeah. Any other questions for Sarah? Ian Blake?
Sarah, you mentioned during your presentation that the accommodation was for the owner. The application is for guest accommodation. Could you explain how that comes about?
Well, that is what we were advised. In fact, it states in the report that we were all issued with that that the, let me get my words around this, that the owner would visit periodically in a year, a few times a year, and they would be staying in that annex, not in the house, which is
Thank you for that.
Elaine?
Thanks. So you said there was an infestation of rats in the village at the moment. Are there birds on the site there just now?
So I don't know. I don't go hunting for rats. I just look out my kitchen window and they're all running across my
But are the birds there at the moment? That's it.
Are the what, sorry?
Are they duty birds which are currently on the premises?
Well, there aren't any birds there at the moment, but so I don't know whether that's now abated because we haven't had to call the rat man out.
So this is when the birds were there before you had problems with rats?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's rats in everywhere you live, aren't there? There's rats around, but not to the extent that we've seen them. It's been pretty horrific.
Thanks, Elaine. Any other questions for Sarah? Jim McComb?
Chair, Sarah, how frequently have you had to call the rat man out?
Quite a lot. Billy comes. He's just very obliging. I phone him up. He comes and puts his poison down, which I don't like because it just affects all the other wildlife in your area. But he'll then come back and say, no, there's still rats, and he'll come. So it's been quite. I couldn't count how many there have been, but there have been more than on one hand. And it's not just me; it's the neighbours all the way along the village. So you would need to speak to everybody.
Would you say the occasions have been in double figures?
In double figures, probably, yes. Yeah.
Any other questions for Sarah? Okay, thank you, members. Sarah, you now have the opportunity
Can I have a glass of water? Can I catch my breath for a minute?
Yeah, sure,
thank you.
And as somebody pointed out, there is a seat if you prefer to sit down.
No, I'd rather stand, I think, otherwise
okay.
Thank you.
Well, just don't rush whenever you're ready, Sarah. You have the same 3 minutes, and I'll remind you with 30 seconds to go.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right. These are read on behalf of Richard Colbeck. There is a history of retrospective planning applications at this site. The current application is also retrospective in part, as the raising of the height of one of the aviaries started over 2 months ago. I am concerned about this because it is a blatant use of the planning process, relying on the fact that overstretched planning officers may not have the resources to deal with the completed projects which don't comply, thereby effectively bypassing the planning process. In the planning application report, the agent's responses to concerns raised by neighbours are quoted, and he states why he feels the issues raised, i.e. noise, smell, etc., will not be a problem. He has, however, not given any evidence for justifying this, nor has he given any solutions. The previous owner and operator of the site would get very stressed about neighbours going about their routine everyday business, as disturbance from activities such as a chainsaw, having bonfires, flying kites on the playing field, could disrupt the breeding of his birds. He has subsequently moved to a new location which is more remote from human habitation. This draws me to the conclusion that this is not a suitable location for the breeding of birds of prey. The recommendation as a planning application report is not very clear. The initial part of the paragraph does not, however, make it clear that no development should take place until a delegated lighting plan is approved. But as I have already pointed out, work has already started. Regarding approval of a lighting plan, I point out that neighbours have already been subjected to the ridiculously excessive, badly designed external lighting at the recently completed Henderson Close sheltered housing complex. This may have looked acceptable on paper, but is totally inappropriate. What reassurance can be given that the recommended conditions relating to the use of the proposed guest annex will be enforced long term? Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. We'll give you a few minutes. We can't ask questions on that because you're responding on behalf of a third party. But if you want to have a minute or two for another sip of water, we'll then get the next statement, which is on behalf of Karen Priest. But whenever you're ready, Sarah.
Okay, thank you. I read this on behalf of Karen Priestley. I am surprised that such a development ever was allowed at this location, with it being so close to housing and people. This does not seem to fit with a local development plan, as it is out of character with the residential buildings bounding onto it. There are no farm-type buildings immediately nearby. As the plan shows, there are a lot of structures, buildings squashed into a small area. I am concerned by the increased use of the narrow lane passing Henderson Close down to West Park. Speed of vehicles, number, and indeed noise of car engines and radios. It is a narrow lane and vehicles must be driven with respect to other users. It was surprising for there not to be any report requested or provided by Environmental Standards or SEPA. This appeared to be downplayed in the report. Major concerns have been flagged in regard to the material considerations and the impact on neighbours and indeed the whole community. Rats, noise, smell, hygiene. Water runoff is entering the Cagunyan Lane via a drainage channel, and if the site is reactivated, the discharge from the cages will pollute it. This must not happen. I respectfully request a full investigation and site visit before this application is taken any further.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Again, members can ask questions on that particular statement, but thank you for your time. If you'd like to take your seat again,
thank
that'd
you.
be great. Feel free to take that glass with you if you want. There are plenty of others there.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. We next have Kathleen Lai. Catherine, you're doing a presentation on your own behalf, and then you're going to read a statement. So you'll have 3 minutes for yourself first, and then members might ask you questions, and then your statement will follow on a different 3-minute window. So just again, whenever you're ready, Catherine.
Okay. These comments are based on my own experience, having lived with the neighbouring falcon breeding site since 2005. It is too close to a residential area. My own house at its nearest point is less than 60 yards away. Others are even closer. If the nuisance of noise and smell remains, in spite of the applicant's assurances, what recourse do we have? All previous complaints in the past to the relevant council departments were dismissed. These birds are easily disturbed and become noisy. The recent Loreburn development in BEESWING had to be delayed as the building was due to start at a critical time in the breeding cycle. This is not a business. It's a breeding site for a private falcon collection. It will not bring income into the local area. The report to the committee justifies the development as it is a development of an existing business. However, the applicant's agent states, and I quote, "This will be a breeding project for the owner's own hunting falcons. None of the falcons are for sale. You can't have a business without sales." There are some other inaccuracies in the report. Contrary to the report, to the best of my knowledge, this property is not connected to any wastewater treatment facility. It has a septic tank. Access off the main road has not been improved at any time. There are no details on how the droppings, etc. will be disposed of. The proposed development would see an increase of around 20% in the number of breeding chambers on the site. These have and will be issues. There have been and will be issues with waste disposal. We hope that the committee have had the opportunity to look at the photographs which we included as appendices on our submission and can appreciate how obtrusive the current structures are in the landscape. It is clear to us that, had the current structures been subject to the regular planning process, i.e. not retrospective, it would not have been allowed due to its proximity to houses in the village. West Park has a significant area of ground running to several acres behind the house, which at its lowest point is over 30 feet lower than the residential area, and which, with adequate planting, would provide a setting for something far less intrusive. We urge the committee to refuse any further development next to West Park House, where it will impact on those of us living nearby. We also respectfully request that, if any approval is given for further development now or in the future, that the existing breeding facilities and flight or hat pens are subject to a limited period of use prior to them being relocated to a more suitable location well below the house, and that in the meantime all screen planting is maintained and improved. Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Catherine.
Could I just have a drink of water? The adrenaline has terrible effects.
Do any members have any questions for Catherine? David?
Thank you, Catherine. You've done at least as well as Mrs. May getting through that.
I'd like to think I did better.
I can't say that. Obviously, I think you think things have been unsatisfactory up until now with the rat situation, etc. Are you not at all worried that by refusing this, we're missing out on the chance to improve matters at all?
I just think it's inappropriate. Unfortunately, the photographs don't show the view from my house, which I will look out of my sitting room and my dining room windows directly. I can't remember how long it is, 60 feet of breeding chambers. And fine, there's a hedge between us. I own the field between the house and West Park. And that's fine. It's a deciduous hedge. The leaves will disappear in the winter. I don't know. I don't think the applicant has provided any evidence that his management system will be any better than the one that's gone before. And as I say, once that's there, it's a fait accompli.
Thanks, Catherine. Any other members for Catherine? Okay, when you feel comfortable, Catherine, we'll have your statement, please.
Jane Feltham of Lotus View BEESWING has asked me to bring these comments to the committee. Firstly, it is unclear whether this is to be run as a business or a family affair. If it is a family-run affair and not a commercial enterprise, why is a further annex needed? The size of the house is sufficient to accommodate a family and visitors. The need for a staff or guest annex suggests it is to be run as a commercial enterprise. Why are the details not specified for it? This development would be detrimental to the village of BEESWING on the grounds of its appearance and also because of the noise and smell which we have already experienced over the last 10 years or so. The smell from the breeding development is worse than normal farmyard smells. This is particularly unpleasant for those downwind of the pens to the east of the village. Vermin have also been a problem since the breeding business was established. The council pest control officer has attended my own house and those of the neighbours on several occasions to deal with rats in the garden. Rats are a health hazard and seem to be attracted to this type of operation. Given the proximity of the Lindsay Memorial playing field, this could pose a risk to the children of the village. I would also like to highlight the poor access on and off the main road and the increased traffic on the narrow access lane to West Park. I would point out that in a previous application in 2004, both the Principal Roads Officer and the Chief Constable recommended that there should be no further substantial development served via this access, and that was Planning Application 04/P/30179. This was before the development of the BEESWING Training Centre site by Lowerburn Housing. Why have their previous comments not been taken into regard? It is a dangerous junction from all approaches. I hope that the committee accept that an expansion of this development be wholly inappropriate in this residential setting.
Thanks very much, Catherine. Again, if you're welcome to that glass back to your seat, we can't ask you questions on that particular
thank you.
prepared statement. So thank you both ladies for your time. We now have Steve Joyce on, he's the agent on behalf of the applicant. Steve, you'll have the same 3 minutes, and I'll remind you with 30 seconds to go, just to wind your presentation up. And just again, whenever you're ready.
Hi, yeah, I mainly came just to answer any of the questions that you might have, but with regard noise and smell, the falcons that Mr. Obeid's going to have are all naturally bred, so they tend not to call as much as hand-raised imprints do. Plus the pens themselves, they're going to be double-lined, so it'll be sound deadening anyway. The existing pens is just steel panels on a very sparse timber frame, so they resonate anyway. The new pens, like I say, will be much, much quieter. With regards smell, the pens will be washed down on a 3-monthly rota, but all the wash-off will be run into ego drains into septic tanks, which will then be emptied as and when required. So there'll be no effluent left around. The waste from the feeding, the chambers will all have food drawers, and all the waste food will be taken out and frozen for disposal by Oakbank, who will collect it on a monthly basis. Same with all of the guts and feathers and things from the feed. That'll be all frozen and taken away on a monthly basis as well. So in terms of smell, there should be no smell.
Thank you very much for that. Elaine did have a question. Elaine.
Yes, I just wondered how many birds were likely to be on the site.
He's bringing in 50 falcons initially.
And these are just for his own private use?
Yes, Mr. Obeid, he organises hunting trips for Sheikh Mohammed, Sheikh Hamdan, and a couple of the Kuwaiti sheikhs. So these are the...
And they are in this country, or they...
No, it's...
They go back to...
Yeah.
Saudi, right.
But they'll hunt for 3 months at a time, so they need plenty of hunting birds.
No, the birds stay, are hunting here rather than, or are they going...
No, they go to the UAE to hunt, yeah.
Just could ask also about the alterations which have already been done, that the stable block had already... alterations had already started. Was that the current owner, or was that the previous owner who'd done that?
The current owner. At the moment, that's just the blocking up of the doorways and things ready for the plumbing.
Yeah, I just wondered why that work and the raising of the roof of the chamber had already started before planning permission was given?
The raising of the chamber was because we need those... The chamber block 1 is going to come down. It's going to get completely demolished because it's totally unsuitable and it's fallen down. It's going to be temporarily used as a quarantine station to bring the falcons in, because we have to quarantine them in the UAE and then quarantine them here for 20 days prior to them going into the new chambers. So once they're out of that building will be coming down.
Thanks, Elaine. John Martin.
Thanks. It's just, we've heard a lot about the rats, bringing rats, it increases the rat thing. What precautions are being taken to make sure that...
There'll be no waste. I mean, there'll be no food left in the pens. All that's taken and frozen on a daily basis. So there'll be no food incentive for rats to be there. Just purely because, I mean, we've had to clean all of these pens out. We know the previous owner just left the carcasses in there because the whole place was full of bones and feathers and everything. So obviously it was an enticement for the rats. And I mean, the current owners will be actively discouraging rats. I mean, they'll be putting traps out and everything, because they don't want rats on the premises.
Thanks, John. Councillor James, then Councillor Just.
Steve, in what sense is this a business?
It's not. The falcons aren't for sale. They're his own hunting falcons, and they'll be gifted. They tend not to sell them.
And this site has got a history of retrospective planning, and you started on this phase already before having planning permission. I mean, how could one be guaranteed you wouldn't go down further phases, for example, free flying and other uses?
There's no intention to free fly any of the falcons here. The young falcons will be taken from the chambers and they'll be put into the hack pens and then immediately shipped to the UAE. All the flying and everything will be done over there. There'll be no flying here.
Okay, and just to alleviate my confusion. This guest accommodation, that's for the owner or his well, I can't
That's for
say.
the owner when he comes. That's for Mr. Rebeard. He's got a manager who will be in the house running the place. And the staff is just purely because he'll need, one man can't physically look after that many falcons. So he will be employing local labour too.
So the owner, in fact, would be a guest in his own property?
Yes.
Right. Just to clarify, it's not a business and the owner will be a guest?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think the accommodation being described as guest house means that anyone can take
Yeah,
residence.
he obviously will be fetching people over with him as well.
Andrew.
Thanks, Chair. My question was more on the socio-economic benefits, such as how many jobs will this create? Will you be using local firms to actually transport?
Yes, I mean, we're using Oakbank to do the waste removal, and I think they'll be doing all the septic tank removal and everything. And there'll be local labour employed, obviously, to help with feeding the falcons and the like.
So how many local people employed?
Probably 2 or 3. I mean, I don't know how many Oakbank employ, but I mean, they'll be there on a fortnightly basis emptying the animal waste.
Anyone else have any questions for the agent? I've got John, Jock McKee and Dougie.
Thank you, Chair. You say initially there will be 50 falcons. What's the maximum capacity of this?
At the moment, as it stands, you could probably go another 50 in, but that's not the plan.
Once all the bird days are in place, what's the maximum capacity?
Probably 100 falcons total.
You also said the waste foods would be removed daily. Does that mean the road will be used daily to remove
the procedure would be you'd remove the food from the chambers. That would then be frozen in boxes. We've got 2 big walk-in freezers, one for food stuff, one for waste stuff. That'll be frozen and either removed on a fortnightly or a monthly basis, depending on the volume.
How much noise will there be from these large freezers?
None. It's the quiet run.
Will there be a new septic tank put in for the breeder sheds?
Yes, the septic tank's going in for all of these. At the moment, the floors in these is just gravel and earth. Because these are coming down, and similarly with the other ones, we'll be putting a concrete floor in, rebuilding a concrete floor into eco drains, and each one have their own septic tank. So there'll be no water, there'll be no runoff going into any streams or any. At the moment, we've had to reconnect. If you look at this picture here, none of that roof there was connected to any drainage, so it was just running on that ground. So they've connected a field drain to run into the field drainage system to take the stormwater away. Just it was rolling down the yard and then down.
Thank you for that. I am concerned that you say the large freezers will be soundless. In my experience, freezers are never soundless.
Well, I mean, there'll be a low decibel rating, and the motors are mounted on the back of the stable for one of them, and the other one will be down behind the quarantine centre. I can clarify with a decibel rating if so needed.
Jock McKee and then Dougie.
It's just a question regarding the site. Is the original house still there?
Yes.
Sandstone house?
Yeah.
And who uses that?
At the moment, that's going to be the manager.
Okay, thank you.
Dougie.
Thank you. Couple of questions, Steve. I'm interested to know what regime or what conditions are in place in terms of the well-being of the birds, and also what breed of falcon is it that are being bred there? How long are the birds actually on site? And also, I think you mentioned earlier that naturally bred falcons are less noisy. Can you just clarify that for me, please?
Yeah, hand-raised falcons tend to see people as parents, mates, so they'll call constantly at them. Whereas natural bred ones don't. They'll call if predators fly over or ravens fly over. They'll call at those, but they don't call at people. So they call very infrequently.
And the breed and
they're predominantly gerfalcons. There might be some peregrines, some Peel's peregrines, but predominantly gerfalcons. And the parent birds at the moment are between 2 to 4-year-old in the UAE. they'll stay on site, they'll not be leaving site anymore. The young will leave once they are 8 to 9 weeks old.
Right, okay. And it's just the last part of my question, in terms of the well-being of the birds, you know, what inspection, I don't know, this is all new to me, but what regime is in place to ensure that the birds are being properly looked after?
We have veterinary, we have an employed vet at LOCKERBIE who will do monthly checks to make sure everything's healthy. I mean, that's one of the reasons for raising the chambers, because at the moment, the chambers, I mean, it looks quite high at that end, but it's actually built on a slope, so as you get to the other end, it's only about 2 metres high. So the chambers get smaller and smaller as you walk up the chambers, which is no good for this size of falcon. Which is, I mean, on that building now, that bit there is getting totally taken down because they're imping chambers and they're just too small. On the middle of it, there are bigger chambers. They'll be increased in size to 6 metres by 4 metres by 3 metres high.
Thank you.
Space.
John?
Thank you, Chair. Steve, these breeding chambers are very large. Is air conditioning necessary? Will there be air conditioning units in these chambers to preserve?
No, they're open topped. They've got net tops. The quarantine station that we've designed, it's got a full aircon HEPA filter system.
So there's no noise producing equipment on the site?
Other than the freezer motors, that's the only thing that there would be. And like I say, the new freezer is it's on the back of the stable block. There's already an existing walk-in freezer there, which will be getting moved down behind the quarantine, which will be used for the waste products.
Okay, if another member, Jim, we'll try and no digress from the plan application. Eh?
Not at all, Chair. Thank you. Do you have the agreement of SEPA with regard to the discharge of drainage water into the local water courts?
No, not yet, because we have to put the proposal for the septic tanks. And that's, I mean, we've previously done one in Bunchester Bridge at Hoyk, and that's what they asked for. They asked for a full containment septic tank, and that to be emptied monthly, or how quickly it needed to be emptied once it was full. We still have to speak to CBA.
And that can be dealt with by condition as well, I would have thought. Correct? Okay. If there are no other questions for Steve, we'd just like to take your seat again, sir. Thank you very much. Okay, members, we're now in session. Ian Blake.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a question for David, actually. We've heard quite clearly from the agent that the falcons being used here are for private use, and yet through the report, paragraphs 4 and 2, it's quite clearly the policy ED2 supports the proposals which expand existing businesses, and then again, as the proposal is an expansion of a bird rearing business. Just to explain the differences in that. And also a second one, if I may, with regards to the guest annex, we've heard again quite clearly that this is going to be used by the owner. And it's the question of whether the owner could be a guest, or is this a second home for the owner here?
I think David already answered the second one. As a guest accommodation, anyone can use it, including the owner, I presume. But David will answer both your questions, Ian.
It is, in planning terms, I would regard it as a business, notwithstanding the comments we've heard. It is an unusual situation where you've got somebody who's in a lucky position that they can actually fund this, but effectively he is employing somebody to stay in the main house and run this as an operation on his behalf. So there is a commercial element to it in that he is funding that, and the birds, whether he's gifting them at the end or selling them, is, to be honest, not a huge material planning consideration, but it is an operation, which is in planning terms, I would view this as a business, because it's actively breeding the birds for export, and how they're actually exported and what happens after that, as I say, is not probably a material planning consideration. It is also an unusual situation that you have an absentee owner. In most normal businesses, you would find the main house would be occupied by the farmer and the person who's actually carrying out the works. That's not the case here. He's actually employing somebody who is on site and undertaking that on his behalf, but the guest accommodation is effectively for the owner to come and visit and probably bring people who wish to see the birds being bred themselves. So it's atypical. It's not something that you see every day as an application. We've had to consider it on its own merits. But obviously there is a considerable planning history to the fact that there is an existing breeding activity taking place at the site. On that basis, it is, in planning terms, as I say, it's regarded as commercial.
David, James?
Yes, I was coming to the same points raised by Councillor Blake there, but that you know, in the applicant's agent's own words, this is not a business, and I disagree. This is a guest house because you can't literally be a guest in your own property, I don't think. But on planning grounds, I mean, this is a large-scale private bird factory, too close to a residential neighbourhood, and it's had problems in the past. I think by expanding it, those problems can only get worse. So I don't think we should approve this application.
So what are you saying? Are you putting forward a proposal to refuse it, and if so, on what grounds?
Yes, on the grounds of the amenity to the other villagers around it, and also I don't know if I can that it doesn't comply to ED2 or OP1, in my opinion.
We'll wait and see what other members have to say, but I sometimes think you just can't say it's contrary because you don't like it. There has to be sound grounds.
Well, the fact that if they say it's not a business, I don't think we should then reconvert it to being a business, and it's not a guest house. So, I mean, the policy says we need to expand existing businesses. This is not running at the moment, or create new ones. They don't want to have a business, apparently. And the guest annex is not for guests, and so I think it contradicts both those, in my opinion. And I'm entitled to my opinion. That's it, and that's the way I'm going to vote on it.
You're entitled to your opinion, but it might not fit in planning terms. Patsy?
Yes, it was something that was brought up, I think, by Mrs. Lai, which was about the access onto the main road, whereby in previous applications, I think she said the Chief Constable and roads officers had said that there should be no more increased activity there without improvement to the access onto the A711, and we haven't got that in this report, it seems. Can I just ask about that? Because I did go in and look at it today, and it is a shocking exit onto that main road.
I'll get to reply to
that. Just refer members to page 10 and the comments of the Council Roads Officer in 2.1. So basically, they're happy with that. If you go back as a previous frequent user of the BEESWING training centre, I would myself think that the amount of usage that went on when that was actively being used as the main council training centre compared to what it now is as Henderson Court, I think the use will probably reduced. But I do agree that the access is not perfect, but it's very, very difficult to actually improve that access beyond the current situation. Certainly the roads comments here are there's no objection to it. So they have been consulted.
What I'm saying is that what was brought up was that in a previous application, and I didn't get the number written down, that the Chief Constable and said that there should be no more increased use of the until there is an improved exit onto the and access. And we're disregarding that now, are we?
Well, first, we don't have that information to hand, and second, the Roads Authority were consulted
Sorry, with
again.
due respect, Chair, I'm asking
and I'm answering, Patsy.
No, I'm asking
no,
planning
I'm telling you,
officers.
I'm answering. The Roads Authority has been asked again, and their current opinion is featured in the document. John?
No, I've got a breeding facility there at present. I think this would be an improvement on anything that's there at present. So I would go with the officer's recommendations with subject to conditions.
Well, so far we have Councillor James with a proposal to refuse it. Do a seconder? Ian?
I'm not proposing to second it at this stage, but what I do think, I think that there are a lot of confusion on this particular application and also with the roads access, and I would propose a site visit.
Okay, is there a seconder for a site visit? Jim McComb. Is there an alternative proposal?
I'll propose that we don't have a site visit.
Do you have a seconder? Jock McKay? Okay. We have a vote then as to whether or no we conduct the site visit. Nick, when you're ready.
Just for clarification, the proposal to have a site visit will be the motion. The proposal not to will be the amendment. So, Councillor Dempster.
Motion.
Councillor Campbell.
Motion.
Councillor Blake.
Motion.
Councillor Doogie Campbell.
Motion.
Councillor Gilroy. Councillor Giusti.
Motion.
Councillor James. Councillor Martin.
Amendment.
Councillor McComb.
Motion.
Councillor McKee.
Amendment.
Councillor Murray.
Amendment.
Councillor Young.
Motion.
Thank you. Voting is 9 in favour of the motion and 3 in favour of the amendment.
Okay, David will organise a site visit and members will be notified of the date. We'll go on to agenda item number 5. Use of holiday caravan site permitting 11 months holiday occupancy at SOUTHERNESS Holiday Village, SOUTHERNESS. This is a full application. Recommendations approved subject to conditions. It's a major application. The case officer is Chris McTeer. Chris, when you're ready, just take us through your presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair. The application before members is today is here because it constitutes a major development as defined by the hierarchy of development regulations. The application is for the use of holiday caravan site permitting 11 months holiday occupancy at SOUTHERNESS Holiday Village, adjacent to SOUTHERNESS. There's the application site there. The holiday park extends around Gilfoot Bay down in the Solway Firth, and the site itself extends to approximately 36.5 hectares or 90 acres in old money. On page 21 of your committee papers, section 1.11, there's an overview of the non-planning history to the site at SOUTHERNESS. It's been developed in a very piecemeal fashion over a considerable length of time. The first application that's noted on the list there, TP 71280, is the first application with a mention of an occupancy restriction on it, condition 3 of that old application from 1980. Currently, the site licence, as issued by the council, limits the maximum number of holiday units on the site to 733, and occupancy is limited to 8 months during the period 1st of March to 31st of October for any given year. Normally, when the planning authority are looking to make an amendment such as this, members would be aware that we would make an application, or the applicant would make an application under section 42 of the Planning Act to modify a condition. The problem that we have here is that there's been so many applications over the past, it's difficult to know which one a section 42 application would relate to. So on page 20, you can see the application is being made under section 8 of the 2006 Act, which amends section 32A of the Principle 97 Planning Act, which is a variation of an application other than one referred to the Scottish Ministers. Basically, it gives the it gives the planning authority the power to vary applications after they're made. So effectively what we'll create here is a blanket condition that we would sort of throw over the ones that we already have there. So it's a blanket variation for the site. In terms of the local development plan, policy ED10 offers support for the development. ED10 covers tourism, but it should be noted that policy ED10 also says that there is a presumption against tourist accommodation being used for permanent residence. That's outlined on page 24 of your committee papers, point 4.3. There is a condition attached to that, condition number 1 of any approval, just says that none of the caravans covered by this planning permission shall be occupied as the sole or main residence of the occupant or occupants, and they'll be used for holiday use only. Also, a consideration at the site at SOUTHERNESS, the application site lies adjacent to the Upper Solway Flats and Marshes SSI and Special Protection Area, which are nationally or internationally designated sites. So they are afforded a statutory protection. We consulted with Scottish Natural Heritage on the application. Their response is summarised on page 22, and they didn't object to the proposal, although there is a condition requiring monitoring of breeding birds over the winter months, which is when the qualifying interests are on site. A full assessment of the application is given in the committee papers, and for the reasons given in the report, I recommend this application for approval. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Any members got any questions for the case officer? Patsy, Elaine and John.
It's just that the recommendation at 5.1 and bullet point 1, is that easy to monitor, if you like, that, you know, the occupation is only for holidays and not for permanent use? I mean, it's all very well putting a condition in, but there's no point putting it in if you can't actually monitor it. Just wondering how you do that.
Chris?
I mean, there are tests of conditions that we would attach to them. I mean, by its very nature, it is a holiday park, so they do have to maintain a register of people that are on site. So that information is available should we wish to see it. So it is, I suppose, in relative terms, quite easy to check if people were living there permanently.
Patsy?
But my point is, I mean, do you check it? I mean, do you monitor it to make sure that's what's happening here, or do you just put it in as a condition and hope it works?
David's got some additional information for you, Patsy.
Well, basically, unless there is a problem, somebody brings it to our attention, no, we don't have the resource to go out and check 700 caravans and make sure they are being used for that purpose. But it is obviously a holiday site. It is an easier condition. That's the wording that you've got there from condition 1 is pretty much the standard wording that we would use these days for holiday uses. It is easier to use that than the occupancy for a number of months, for the simple reason that if there is any doubt, we can go to the assessor and find out if that is, you know, somebody's paying council tax and is registered as a main residence there. And therefore, it is easier to have that condition than the long-standing historical ones. And as Chris was saying, basically what this is doing is taking a very piecemeal evolution of the site over a long period of time and trying to tie it all together. So it hopefully should be easier.
Elaine?
It's just with reference to the one representation against this that we've received, which includes a statement there will be additional sewage washed up on the beach, which I found rather concerning, that there would be any sewage washed up on the beach at the time. I noticed that Scottish Water hasn't actually objected, but just wants confirmation that there isn't any problem with sewage disposal from the site.
Chris?
As far as I know, like you say, the Scottish Water didn't object to it. As far as I know, there's not been any issues that we're aware of for that one. I mean, there's no physical change, which is, I suppose, what's slightly unusual with this application. It's not an extension to the caravan part, so all the infrastructure and everything is still there. It's just the use of the site.
John, do you get any in?
Just wondering, what 11 month is it it's going to be used? When's the month it's not going to be used?
Chris?
January.
Dougie?
Thanks, Chair. Paragraph 4.13 on page 25. SNH expressed concerns regarding additional disturbance to the site, and there's reference to the access management plan. Two questions I've got arising from this. Is there any requirement on residents of the caravan park to adhere to this management plan, or is it simply a case of something that should be respected? And other than people walking their dogs, etc., are there any sort of sporting activities that would take place during the summer months on Gilfoot Bay that may extend into the winter months and therefore, could potentially cause disturbance to the wildlife?
If I take the second point first, I don't think so. I don't think there's anything that happens in the bay other than that. But I mean, that's not to say that there's not anything there. Taking the first point, the access management plan is something that the site owner or the site operators are putting in place. And I think part of it is very much that they would expect the people to adhere to any information that is out on the signboards. I mean, there's a sort of mixture of signage that they're proposing, so there are ones that telling people to be aware of certain things, but there's also going to be boards there that will draw people's attention to the sort of the varied wildlife and things that are on site. But the access management plan needs to be monitored. There is a condition 3 of the consent requires that the applicant they'll employ an ornithologist to help them out with that one as well. But people accessing the beach during the winter months are monitored, but they would expect a certain amount of voluntary behaviour with regard to that.
Ian and then David.
Thank you. My first point was actually asked by John, and that clarifies it's going to be closed during the month of January. The second point was actually just a point of maybe assistance there, because there has been some consideration of the concern of sewage. Parkentine did have a considerable investment in Southerness just 2 or 3 years back with a complete new sewage system and water system that actually supplies a lot of the permanent dwelling houses in Southerness, although Scottish Water do have some connection there.
Thanks for that, Ian. David?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the recommended decision following conditions number 3, the ornithologist report and the monitoring. I mean, that's this is a full application, so it's not that it's got a time limit on it or anything. So this permission will be given and it won't be revoked. Whatever these whatever report and monitoring programs show up, what is the point of them, so we can learn that we shouldn't do the same thing again if it all went wrong, or is there, they're going to work with the ornithologist as time goes on, or?
Chris?
The condition 3 we put in conjunction with SNH. I think if SNH had any sort of fundamental issues with it, then I think they would probably have raised an objection. They would have sort of taken the precautionary approach with that. I think the monitoring program that they were looking to put in place, I think is probably for their peace of mind, just to make sure that there are no unacceptable impacts in the future. But you are correct when you say once the if the application is approved, there's no way to bring it back. But I suppose if any unacceptable impacts arise in the future, then we would just have to deal with them as they arose. It's difficult to see that far forward.
Thanks, Chris. David?
Do we know if the applicant will actually pay for the monitoring? Because it might be actually a little bonus of the plan permission if actually we're getting more data and etc. But if they're paying for it, but could you clear that up, please?
Yeah, I suppose the short answer is yes. The onus is on the applicant to do that. So the report will need to be compiled by a suitably qualified ornithologist. So yeah, they'll have to pay for that.
Okay, members, if there are no other questions for the case officer, there are no eligible speakers, therefore we're now in session. If there are no proposals, do we go with the officer's recommendation? A unanimous decision. Nick, can you confirm the unanimous decision of the committee, please?
Yes, Chair, I can confirm that. Agreed as per the officer's recommendations, yes, Chair.
Thanks, members. We've got to agenda item 6, the erection of dwelling house information of access. Amended design to that previously approved under 14/B/3/0394, retrospective, at 47 George Douglas Drive, Dumfries. The application type's a full plan permission. The applicant's Callum Edgar. Recommendation is approved subject to conditions. And the case officer's Iona Brooke. Iona, just take us through your presentation when you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chair. The proposed application relates to the erection of a dwelling house at 47A George Douglas Drive. This application has been brought before you for reasons of transparency because the applicant is actually employed by the council and the site itself has been subject to previous consideration by the Planning Applications Committee. The original application was heard before the Planning Application Committee in October 2014. Under the scheme of delegation, it was brought before you as there was more than 6 representations received in relation to it. The Planning Application Committee at that time deferred the application for further investigation into the payment of a commuted sum in relation to the offsetting of a loss of area of open space. The application was brought back before the Planning Application Committee in December 2014, where, against officer recommendation, it was refused on the grounds that the application would result in the development of an area of open space which would remove it and the development would reduce the street's amenity. This decision was then appealed to the Scottish Government, where in April 2015 the appeal was granted and permission was given to erect a dwelling on site. A dwelling has now been constructed, but the development was not carried out in accordance with approved drawings, and this application therefore seeks modifications to the approved design. This is the site here, 47A George Douglas Drive. Now the 4 images you see at the top are the drawings that were approved in the original application as approved under the Scottish Government appeal. You can see that at ground level the windows, the fenestrations have been altered on almost every window. The ones to the rear have been slightly altered as well. Additional Velux windows have been added in the rear roof space, and solar panels have also been added to the rear elevation. The roof ridge has also increased slightly. Now, the elevations here indicated at the top were as approved. With 47A, this is the site that we're considering. In the original application, it was designed to match the ridge at number 47 itself. However, now it sits approximately 70 centimetres higher than the actual neighbouring dwelling at number 47. This is the property as is built. This is the front elevation, and this is a view of the rear elevation. 2 objections were received in relation to this current assessment. In relation to the application did not adhere to the approved drawings. It was out of keeping of the existing streetscape, and new elements had been introduced which could give rise to a reduction in residential amenity. The biggest impact of the property itself is on the rear elevation. These drawings show that drawing at the above was the drawing that we did approve originally, and the picture is as built down beneath. The impact of the design modifications in the rear elevation are not untypical to general separation and property interrelationships within modern housing developments. This is a view from the rear garden of the developed site, looking east and west into neighbouring curtilages. The biggest impact will be with the dwelling at number 47, as it's closer to any other dwelling that's already in existence. However, the biggest impact of the actual modifications that we're currently assessing would be in relation to the Velux windows and the rear elevation. But as you can see, given the projection and the design of the actual building as built, the impact of the Veluxes on the neighbouring dwelling are mitigated by the screening effect of the actual projection. It is considered that the house is compatible with the character of the area and does not look out of context when taken into consideration with the wider streetscape scene. This is just a view of 47 and 47A as built from the rear elevation. This is 47 and 47A that we're currently assessing here, so you can see that the pitch is slightly higher than previously approved. And again, this is number 47A that we're considering with the neighbouring property. This is just a wider street scene showing the property we're currently assessing. And again here, this is a property in line with the street scene looking east. It's considered that it is compatible with the character of the area and does not look out of context when taken into consideration with the wider street scene. The revised scheme continues to be accepted in terms of its detail, size and proportion, and therefore we recommend approval in this instance. Thank you.
Thanks, Iona. Any members have any questions for Iona? Ian?
Thank you. I think that most of the applications today appear to be in ALBIE form. In this particular case, I understand that we refused it in 2014 and it went in appeal, and that's fine. But that appeal document had quite strict conditions on the roof height, and I seem to believe it was also for a single story. Unfortunately, I did try to recover the report yesterday when the council system was down, so I couldn't get anywhere near it. But you could maybe explain that a bit further.
Iona?
The original application was indeed for a single-storey property, and as we can see, there has been accommodation created in the rear elevation. This could have been done once the actual application had been, if it had been built as approved, accommodation could have been therefore incorporated thereafter under the permitted development rights and not required to be subject to planning application. But obviously we are here before you now because the application has been modified. There has been an increase in roof height and accommodation has been created within the roof space.
Ian?
I understand what you mean there, but I think with a lower roof height, would it have been possible to get a second to open up the upper floor? There does seem a significance difference. I think it's 700 mil difference.
70 centimetres, yes. I don't think it would have been possible as we had approved to put accommodation within the roof space, and that's why the roof ridge has been increased.
Thank you.
Okay, Ian, back to you.
So what you're saying, Iona, is that if it followed the instructions from the reporter and built the house as was meant to, a single story and all the rest of it, it could have been that you could have gone up into the attic and made an attic rooms, or would you have had to raise the roof and that would have been permitted without, you wouldn't have had to come back for planning permission to raise the roof?
If he was intending to raise the roof, he would have required planning permission for that.
But if he just was going to put those windows in without raising the roof, he could have done that under permitted development, could he?
That is correct, yes.
Right. And with just another question, sorry, Chair, just regards the solar panels. Do you need permission for solar panels? I wasn't sure about that.
In this instance, you wouldn't know.
Just so why is it here as one of the parts of the development? You've raised it in the report.
It was just listed as one of the modifications that deviated from the original planning permission.
Thanks, Patsy. Any other members for the case officer? Again, we have no registered speakers. If there are members on the session. David?
So it's just a question based on my ignorance of planning. If the permission is for a single-storey building, you know, if it expressly says that, why does it expressly say that if permitted development would allow you to put accommodation at a second level?
David will answer this, but I thought we'd finish the questions, that's why. David?
If you have a single-storey property, then, for example, the one on the right-hand side there is clearly a single-storey property. The one on the left, which is the subject to this application, is now single-storey with attic accommodation. it's not a full-blown two-storey property, nor is it even a 1.5 storey. That would require a dormer in it. Basically, it's coming as an application here because the appeal approval was for one distinct property and they've built something different, so that's why it's before yourselves today.
So, members were in session. I think we should all be disappointed that this particular set of circumstances has come to light, especially given the applicant is an employee of the council. He should know exactly what the requirements are, but if there are no... Ian?
Sorry, I really have given this some considerable thought, and I do appreciate the seriousness of it, but I think that the fact that we did refuse it, and fair enough, it got past an appeal, but the reporter themselves put down strict conditions on the roof height, and looking at that with the scale, mass and density, I think it looks out of place. So I would propose that we refuse the application.
Okay, do you have a seconder for that? David, and that's based on the mass, scale and density, is that what you said, Ian?
Yes.
Okay, do we have any alternative proposals? John Martin?
Go with the report with the officer's recommendation subject to the conditions.
I'll second that.
Okay, in that case we have a motion and an amendment. Nick?
Thank you, Chair. So the motion being to refuse and the amendment being to go with the officer recommendations as per the report. So,
and you're content with both the motion and the amendment being competent?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. In that case, we'll go to the vote.
Councillor Dempster?
Amendment.
Councillor John Campbell?
Amendment.
Councillor Blake?
Motion.
Councillor Doogie Campbell?
Amendment.
Councillor Gilroy? Councillor Giusti?
Amendment.
Councillor James?
Motion.
Councillor Martin?
Amendment.
Councillor McComb?
Motion.
Councillor McKee is not present. Councillor Murray?
Amendment.
And Councillor Young?
Amendment.
Yes, it's 4 for the motion.
So can you just confirm the decision of the committee, Nick, please?
Yes, Chair. There were 4 members voting in favour of the motion and 7 members voting in favour of the amendment. So the amendment is carried.
So the application is approved as set out in the report. Okay, we come to agenda item number 7. Erection of detached garden room, partial retrospective at Craig Lodge, AUCHENMALG, GLENLUCE. This is a full application. Application Mr. Goss, reference number 17/1313/full. Recommendation is to refuse. And the case officer is Tracy Carnegie. Tracy, will you take us through your presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair. As stated, the application is partially retrospective and for the erection of a detached garden room at Craig Lodge, AUCHENMALG, which is a semi-detached dwelling house that's located about 7 kilometres southeast of the village of GLENLUCE in a coastal location. On site, there are a further 5 properties that share the Craig Lodge site. The applicant's land is shown on the slide there, hatched in red, with the footprint of the garden room being outlined in red. Just here. This slide shows the elevations as proposed. And this is a cross-section drawing of the site that's been supplied by the applicant. This slide shows an aerial view of the site prior to the erection of the partially completed building, and it demonstrates the open aspect that was previously enjoyed by the property known as Craig Cottage, which is this property here, with the location of the garden room being approximately here. This photograph shows the stage of construction of the garden room at present. It shows the north elevation, the south elevation, east, and west and north again. This slide shows a view from the east of the Craig Lodge site. And shows the general arrangement. This is a view from the site frontage from the south, showing the garden. Showing the garden room with the property known as Craig Cottage behind. And this is another view from the south. Again, just showing the slightly closer in, showing the garden room, and again, Craig Cottage to the rear. This is the view from the front elevation of Craig Cottage, looking south towards the coast. And this is a view looking southeast from just the side of Craig Cottage, just shown a different angle. This is just a general view from the west, again showing the positioning of the garden room in relation to the other properties that are presently on site. The recommendation is for refusal of the application on the grounds set out in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tracy. Any questions by members for the case officer? Andrew.
Hi, Chair. Thanks very much. This came to an application last time when I was a bit green around the gills when it comes to planning. There was this went to a reporter in the Scottish Ministers where it was classified as a car park. Yeah, the last one we put it in as curtilage with no development rights. Can you give me just a little bit of background on that, just so I'm up to speed?
Tracy?
The structure was built around September 2015 and was built without the benefit of planning permission. The council commenced enforcement action in relation to the development, which culminated in an enforcement notice being served. An enforcement notice carries a right of appeal to Scottish ministers, and the applicant took the opportunity to appeal the enforcement notice to Scottish ministers. The appeal was dismissed and the notice was upheld. And as stated in the report, the reporter did not consider that the area of land formed part of domestic curtilage of the applicant's dwelling house on the site. And on that basis, consequently, didn't carry permitted development rights with it. The applicant subsequently lodged an application, which is the application that you're referring to that was previously before the committee, seeking to remove any ambiguity in relation to the use of the site and to have it reclassified in effect as domestic garden ground. And as I say, that was the application that was previously before committee. The application that's before you just now is with a view to regularising the presently unauthorised structure. The enforcement notice required that the building be removed from the site by January of 2017, and that hasn't been complied with. which constitutes an offence, and the council has reported the offence to the Procurator Fiscal, and the enforcement case is currently ongoing.
Andrew?
Sorry, Tracy, can I just ask, what makes it partially retrospective? In my opinion, really, some of them are retrospective or it's not.
Tracy?
Well, on the basis that it's only partly completed.
Okay, Jim?
Thanks, Chair. Tracy, could you indicate where the view from Craig Cottage was taken? Was it from the front porch of the cottage?
Can you get the microphone, Tracy, please?
Yes, on the front elevation there on the central point.
Jim?
Just in front of the porch?
Yes.
Andrew?
Chair, I've got the council's LDP in front of me, and in the recommendations it says that this is a breach of policy H8, which is alterations and extensions to houses. In my view, this isn't an alteration or an extension, this is actually a completely new building, separate from the house.
Tracy?
Policy H8 supported by supplementary guidance, and if you have a look at supplementary guidance, there is a section within that that has guidance in relation to formation of garage buildings, garden buildings, whether or not they're attached. So that's the relevance there.
Okay. Members, if there are no other questions for the case officer, we have a registered speaker. The registered speaker is Alan Gost, the applicant. This is a local application. It'll take 3 minutes. So, Alan, whenever you're ready, start, and I'll remind you with 30 seconds to go, just to draw your presentation to a conclusion, if you don't mind. Whenever you're ready, Al.
Hello, the first picture here shows the rear access road to my property, Craig Lodge. The building is Craig Lodge South and it's garden ground where permitted development rights have been applied to erect fencing and an installation of the oil tank. The building line is the elevation facing the sea. Next picture, please. In 2004, I sold part of my property, part of my dwelling house. This property became known as Craig Lodge South, the building on the left. A portion of the access road and grass area shown in this picture was allocated from my title to Craig Lodge South as garden ground. The building being constructed on the right of the picture was approved within the retained curtilage, within my retained title. The area forward of Craig Cottage has been continuously used and retained on my title for my use for 20 years. The purchasers of the ground on which Craig Cottage now sits were fully aware of the permitted development rights relating to the areas of ground owned by Craig Lodge South, the new building, and the original title, the parent title of Craig Lodge, which is mine. Next slide, please. This is Craig Cottage on the left. The Mull of Galloway can be clearly viewed from every window at the front of the property. My garden room is built in my garden. Craig Cottage was approved at the rear of my garden at committee in this chambers in 2005. Permitted development rights were not removed by condition. The owners of Craig Cottage have not objected to this planning application nor the one earlier this year to use the ground as garden ground again. Next slide, please. This house at AUCHENMALG has an aspect of a BT building and the Mull of Galloway. This house has been sold during the time Craig Cottage has been for sale. Next slide, please. This picture shows 3 houses near Stonykirk where the aspects of open countryside and garaging left and right. Next slide, please. Completed garage on the left, also at Stonykirk. Next slide, please. This was the open aspect of number 5 Craig Lodge prior to the developments of the garaging. This is showing the garaging of Craig Lodge South. This property number 5 has been sold during the time Craig Cottage has been for sale. Next slide, please. This is the aspect from number
You've
5.
30 seconds to go.
Thank you. Showing the parking area of Craig Lodge South. Next slide, please. This is the second sands, Port William. Next slide, please. To the right of this picture is the houses at the second sands, Port William, with an aspect of existing buildings and the Mull of Galloway. Houses in this development have been resold during the time Craig Cottage has been for sale. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Is any questions for Alan from members of the committee? Andrew?
Hi, Alan. My question is relating to it being a garden room. It kind of looks like it was originally supposed to be a garage. Is it maintained as a garden room and
it's
a garden building?
It's clearly, there's some, if you read previous reports, there was an application in 2012 for a large 4-car garage on that site which was refused. The building that is built there, if we could put the picture up of the front elevation of the building looking north, it would possibly be on one of your own slides. Close. You can see there that you can see 2 blocks high, which is roughly 0.8, and by the time the sill goes in, you would have to ramp that area to the access to actually drive a vehicle into that. So you can see that that is a bifold type door that was to go in there. So therefore, it was never built as a garage. There is landscape or swimming pool windows, as they call, on each of the elevations, and just a single pedestrian back door. So it was designed and built to fit on the site. It's, as we are aware, the planning was approved for the garden last June past. And it's a tidy, well-built, well-designed building which will be used. May I bring the point that the other side of the fence, this is the point I was making about Craig Lodge South, the permitted development rights still exist and have not been challenged by the local planning authority, and there is no need for the owners of that property to bring to the planning department any permitted development they would wish to do on the other side of the fence. So therefore, there is no control of whether it's a good design or a good build, or a bad design and a bad build. And it can't. So therefore, to say that there will be no buildings that are forward of those houses which were built at the back of the rear access road is to say that that aspect anywhere along there can be guaranteed for perpetuity is not the case on the other side of the fence.
Andrew.
So, Alan, would you say that with that building, with its roof on, would you say that that blocks any view or aspect or amenity of Craig Cottage, is it?
Yeah, that's Craig Cottage behind it.
And if so, would you be willing for a condition of, say, a flat roof to be put onto it?
Well, I'll answer the last bit first. With regards to the roof, I personally would have preferred a flat roof, and it was to be my neighbour next door, as you can see, Mr. Moat, next door at Craigview, is a keen gardener, and his plan for this was to bush it up, a green roof, or whatever they call that in today's world. It's a flat growing roof. But the problem you have with that is when my agent did the plans, he said that if it's a flat roof, the planners will not like it because it doesn't have an apex and it's all apex around it. I would prefer a flat roof, and then you're only sitting at around the 2 metres. So any bushing, and realistically this house is well forward on the site, this building, sorry, is well forward of that house on the site. And any bushing of 2 metres or that, it would all become, it looks rather wild and open just now, but it was all to become encompassed and just become a hidden space, so to speak.
Andrew.
Yeah, could I get a bit of guidance from David about the, just from what Alan said about the flat roof there, if planning, would they accept a flat roof in that area, considering there's gables?
That might be something you want to discuss within a session. These are simply questions for the applicant at present. Are there any other questions for the applicant? Dougie?
Thanks. Can I ask what's your intended use of the garden building when it's constructed?
Just as a garden, as a hobby, as a garden room, hobby room, an art room. It's the area here at Craig Lodge is tight for space. All the traditional old Craig Lodge buildings are all to the west of the site. The east is the open area. Like the slides I showed you, part of the house was sold off and the amenity gave it to that. The area I retained, which is this horseshoe shape, was kept because my building is also a large building and it was for amenity for my building. This building at the rear was simply approved as part of my habitable dwelling was being replaced within its own curtilage in 2005. An application was put in for the replacement, and structural policy D4 was for the replacement of a habitable dwelling within its curtilage. That is what that building is that sits behind it. It was a replacement within the curtilage. It was quite unique. The manager, the planning manager from Dumfries, the planning manager from STRANRAER attended the site following the sale of Craig Lodge South and walked the curtilage of my property with me. Those two gentlemen then put forward a proposal to the committee for it to be approved, and it was approved at committee. Now, in the past, there's been an issue when I put an application in 12 because it was a 4-car garage. It was large, and it was refused then because it was a 4-car garage. And that building there's to be wholly used as a garden room, and that is the benefit of it coming to the planning. It's under their umbrella for what it is and what it's going to be used for, the design, the structure, and the look of the building. Like I say, on the other side of the fence, there is no control of design and control. So it's my amenity ground and it's the garden room for my use.
Thank you. We'll try not to protract this, will we?
Genuine question.
I'll get a concise response for Alan if it's a concise question.
That's right.
Sorry.
Is there any effects to your neighbour's access and parking situation?
No, none whatsoever. Can I elaborate slightly on that? Thank you. At the officer for the reporter for the appeals, as Tracy has said, declared that area, there was no evidence other than it's been used as a car park area. Unfortunately, due to the cost of the only recourse I had with that outcome, the only recourse I had was to go to the Court of Session. I had a quote from Brodie's in Edinburgh for between £40,000 and £70,000 to simply ask, because you have to go to the Court of Session, you need advocate solicitors and such like to raise the case. It would cost tens of thousands just to take it to the Court of Session. So therefore, I was advised by those at that firm, they looked at this and said, the case officer, the reporting officer has made a mistake. What they have done is she's allocated the area as parking for all when it's only been your parking. Apply to your local authority, accept the position you've been placed in, apply to your local authority for the parking area to be garden ground. Now, at that application stage, the roads, excuse me, can I have a wee, my whistle's getting wet, it needs a wee wet whistle here. At that planning stage, because it was put through as communal parking area to garden ground, the roads department then become involved, and the case officer who had to ask the agent the question that the roads department have asked is, where are all the residents going to park when you take the car parking away from them? At that point, the correspondence was sent to the planning department from all owners of property and my solicitor and my agent to confirm that they have no rights to park, there is no legal title rights, there is no personal agreements, there is no planning permission, there is no planning conditions. So for the case, for the reporting officer to actually arrive at the conclusion that it was parking for all is just clearly wrong, and I couldn't go down the challenge to the Court of Session to challenge that outcome. So, but all that information was provided to Dumfries and Galloway Planning, and the original application was put forward, as my agent had said, was alleged communal parking. Apparently the word alleged could not be put in the document, so it was changed to communal parking. Once all the information had been received by Dumfries and Galloway Planning, there was debates over, because it's always been, and nothing that can be said is this title that I bought 20 years ago, it's always been part of my title, it's always been used with it. That has been provided now to the planning office, and they changed the title of my application that I paid for. Unfortunately, again, they changed the title of that application from communal parking area to unspecified planning use to garden ground. Now, just so the committee members are fully aware, it's not an unspecified planning use. In 1997, the plans will show a red line around the whole area, because when I bought that property, it was 4 holiday flats. In 1997, I put an application in to change it to 1 dwelling. That was approved by delegated powers. In 1999, I put an application in to subdivide the property. Again, this area was encompassed in that application. So to say that it's unspecified planning use, you could say the same argument for the piece of land I sold next door, and it has a planning use as the garden ground. It's the same application.
Just very quickly, we've got no diagram or picture of what this should look like in the end, have we?
Yeah, well, if Tracy could show the that's what I was saying about the bifold. That's what I was saying about you can see that it's never been designed as a garage. It's a pretty elaborate garage. And also, you would need a very, very small car to try and manoeuvre it into it.
And just as a quick follow-up, do you feel that respects the character and appearance of the property? I guess the property in this case is Craig Lodge.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Excuse me. The LDP supplementary guidance that these alterations, extensions, etc., should respect the character and appearance of the property. And I'm assuming that the property is Craig Lodge. So,
well, the grouping of buildings, and first and foremost, we must appreciate that this is a small building group, and it's not. It doesn't have to be ribbon development. If you look around, no.
Okay, thanks,
Sorry.
Alan. Okay. Dougie.
Thanks, Chair. The applicant went into a lot of detail about previous applications, garages, etc. I just want to bring us back, if I can, in terms of the recommendation that we have in front of us, and that's what we are here to consider, that we should refuse because of a detrimental impact on the amenity of the occupants of Craig Cottage and the existing relationship between neighbouring properties. Are you saying that there would be no detrimental impact on Craig Cottage as a result of this application being approved?
The building is clearly forward in part of that dwelling house. But it's the distance of it and the location as it lies in the ground. If we could put that slide up, please, Tracy, to show the scale. So if you can see that, the way it lies in the ground and such like, and when it's treed up, it is a garden area. It will be used as a garden area. It will be planted up. So you're going to have a green area across a road, which is not unusual.
Chair, just again, to bring it back to application, we're talking about a proposed garden room. We're not talking about a garden area. We're talking about that structure and the impact it would have on the occupants of Craig Cottage.
Well,
I think it might be unfair to ask the applicant to comment on that, because that's something that we can deal with in session. We can actually see with a good selection of images that will let us determine whether or no we feel that there's an impact or no. Any other questions for Alan? In that case, we'd like to take a seat, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, members, we're now in session. If there are no, Andrew?
Chair, I would like to propose a site visit, because I believe that we could actually make conditions to make this acceptable and contrary to OP1 and 2, and I still don't understand how it's relevant to H8. So I would like to move that we go on a site visit.
Do you have a seconder for a site visit? Jim McComb? Jim?
I'll second him.
Any alternative proposals? Do you?
I propose that we don't have a site visit and we approve the recommendation to refuse the application.
You can't do both. You can simply propose that we don't have a site visit and determine the application today.
I apologise.
Content with that.
I'll second that.
John will second that. We have a proposal for a site visit and a proposal that we determine the application today.
Okay, so the motion being to hold a site visit, the amendment being not to have a site visit and to determine the application today. So, Councillor Dempster?
Amendment.
Councillor John Campbell?
Amendment.
Councillor Ian Blake?
Amendment.
Councillor Doogie Campbell?
Amendment.
Councillor Gilroy? Councillor Giusti?
Motion.
Councillor James? Councillor Martin?
Amendment.
Councillor McComb?
Motion.
Councillor McKee?
Amendment.
Councillor Murray?
Amendment.
Councillor Young?
Amendment.
Okay, so that's 2 members voting in favour of the motion and 10 in favour of the amendment.
So we'll determine the application today. Do you?
Yes, Chair.
I thought you had a proposal.
No.
Do we have a... If there are no proposals being tabled, then we'll simply go with officer's recommendation. Okay, thank you. We come to agenda item number 8. An application for change of use of agricultural land to form an extension to existing holiday park, siting of 39 holiday lodges, installation of sewage treatment plant, formation of internal access roads and associated works at WHITECAIRN and GLENLUCE Holiday Park, WHITECAIRN Farm, GLENLUCE. This is a full application. The reference number 17/0937/full. The recommendation is approved subject to conditions, and the case officer is Chris McTeer. Chris, will you take us through your presentation again, and the remaining agenda items are non-speaking items?
Thank you, Chair. The application is in front of members today as it constitutes major development as defined by the hierarchy of development regulations. The site is in excess of 2 hectares. Otherwise, generally applications of this type would be dealt with as delegated applications. The application is for change of use of agricultural land to form an extension to an existing holiday park and to site 39 holiday lodges on the site. The site comprises an area of agricultural land, approximately 2.5 kilometres north-east of the village of GLENLUCE. Access into the application site is taken from within the existing caravan site, which in turn is accessed from the C-class road showing to the south of the the south of the application site. If I have a look, there's the proposed site layout. So they're laid out in a pretty linear fashion. Details of the lodges are shown as well, along with the decked areas associated with them. Finishes have still to be agreed with that. That's subject to a condition of the consent. Turning to the principle of development, there's broad policy support for this. LDP policies ED2, business development in the rural area, and ED10, tourism, both apply in this instance. Going to some photographs of the site taken from the road running to the west of the application site, and that's running back down the road towards the existing caravan site. The vegetation that you can see running down the left of the screen is to be retained, and this is just looking back across the site. The trees form the boundary to the existing caravan site. It does form an extension to the existing caravan site, so there's no real conflict of land use within this application. The other point to note is that the applicant intends to install a foul water drainage scheme capable of being authorised by SEPA. The details are still to be finalised for this, and a suspensive condition has been added to the consent, requiring further details to be submitted. The full assessment's outlined in your committee papers, and for the reasons outlined there, it's recommended that this application is approved. Thank you.
Any questions for the case officer? Patsy?
It's just, I'm looking at the recommendations, and you've got quite at recommendation 3 about the shrub planting and tree planting. And if you go back to the back to where we get a view of all the chalets there, it's all just round the back really of them, is it? You know, there's nothing that looks a bit stark, if you don't mind me saying. I just wondered, are you just doing the tree planting behind the chalets, or are they going to be interspersed and make it more interesting, or what? Not really, can't do that. Because actually they look quite close together as well, which is not so good. I think there's too many.
The scheme's still to be, we require a slightly more detailed plan than the one that's shown there. I think it's difficult to get it's difficult to get a really detailed sort of scheme without knowing sort of types and species in the layout, which is why we've asked for the suspensive condition to be added. But the vegetation that you saw in the photographs to be retained, but we would expect some kind of sort of defensible boundary along the back of the caravan site to exist with that. But the details would be agreed.
And just, I think there's a typo on recommendation 4, which just says in respect of condition 4, which I'm sure your meaning is condition 3, just for...
It should be condition 3, yes.
Thanks, Patsy. Any other members? David?
Do we have any guidelines or limitations on density in this type of installation?
The densities, I mean, we take a judgment on that one, although there are certain standards required by the site licence that we would issue as a council, although it's environmental health that would issue the site licence for that. Given my experience with other applications of this type, the density that you see there is typical of a development of this type.
Thanks, David. Any other members? In that case, we're now in session. If there are no proposals, do we agree with the officer's recommendation? Okay, thank you. That application is approved. We come to agenda item number 9. Planning permission in principle for erection of observatory with restaurant and shop and formation of access road at KIRKBRYDE Farm, Port Logan, STRANRAER. Application type is planning permission in principle with approval of design. The reference is 16/1779/BIP. The recommendation is approved subject to conditions, and the case officer is Billy Murray. Billy, when you're ready, will you take us through your presentation, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you say, this is an application for planning permission in principle with approval of the design in detail. I'll take you through the slides that we have. This is a location plan. The application site is on the summit of KIRKBRYDE Hill, which, as you see there, is more or less centrally placed towards the southern part of the Rinns Peninsula. That's an aerial view of the same image, showing the site in red and the access road running to the left to the foot of the hill where it joins the public road. This is a view on the approach to the site from the north on the B7065, which is the public road from which the site would be accessed. This is a view from the B7065 looking up towards the site on the summit of the hill. This shows the existing track, the existing access and the track, which is quite overgrown now in that view, and the double line of fencing with the hedging between, all of which are referred to in the report. This, just for comparison purposes, is a view of the access track as it was at December 2014, which was the time of the previous application that's noted in the planning history section of the report. This is a view halfway up the access track moving towards the site on the summit. This is a view from more or less the same point looking back down. The indicative layout submitted with the application envisages the access being taken by effectively a dual carriageway with a single access track running up the existing track that you see there, and that would be the entrance to the site coming up the hill, and then there would be another 3 metre wide track formed on the right hand side of the line of fencing and hedging that you see in that view, and that would be the egress from the site down towards the bottom of the hill. The other thing to mention in that view is that the indicative layout shows parking in the area to the left of where you see the white car and the access. So just behind the hedge on the side of the public road, that's where the parking would be envisaged. As I say, however, that is an indicative layout only at this stage. And this is just moving further up the hill towards the summit. This is the summit itself as it's presently configured. These are just a few views from the summit showing the open access. That's a view generally northwest towards Port Logan. That's a view generally northeast. As you'll see from the report, the principal elevation of the proposed building would be more or less facing in that direction. There would be excavations into the summit of the hill to set the building down into the hill. The design proposed would have a curved roof, which more or less mirrored the contours of the building, of the landform there, and all of that is considered to be quite a good approach. Apologies. Too sensitive, this. That's a view looking generally, sorry, we've had that one, we've jumped back. That's northeast. That is, again, looking southeast. Coming round to the south, just to note in that view is the small lock-in that's referred to in the report and in submissions, and there was a suggestion in supporting submissions that bird hides or something similar might be formed on that lock-in. This is a view looking west from the summit, and this is a further view on the approach from the south on the B7065 looking back towards the site. Again, the site would be on the summit of the hill that you see in the right of that frame, and in that view you would actually be looking at the rear elevation of the proposed building, although it would be set down on the far side of the hill in this view, and thus would be less prominent. And that's another view from the same place on the B7065 looking north. Again, you note the lock-in and the site itself on the summit of the hill. This is a distant view of the site from just north of Port Logan. That's one that was taken in December 2014. These are the plans submitted with the application. That's the site location plan. That is the site and location plan. This is the proposed floor plans, elevation and section and indicative layout. So what you are considering here is the detail of the design. That's the top two drawings. The top two drawings showing the elevations and the two plans on the left-hand side there, the floor plans. In terms of the layout and the access arrangements, that is indicative only at this stage because in that respect, this is an application for planning permission in principle. This is just a zoomed-in view of the proposed design. As you'll see, it's got a curved grass roof. It is set down into the landform so that it would be less obtrusive. And overall, it's considered that this is quite a good design in its own right, so it has significant merit in its own right. And for that reason, the recommendation is that the design itself would be approved in detail at this stage. And again, these are the floor plans in a closer view. So the recommendation is to approve subject to conditions, and the approval would be for planning permission in principle with approval of the design in detail.
Thanks very much, Billy. Any questions for the case officer? Patsy.
I think this is really interesting, a fantastic design and everything else, but I just wonder if we've had any sort of business plan submitted with this, because it could be just a bit of a wish and a prayer, if you know what I mean. And I just wonder about visitors. I wonder if they've done any research. I mean, the views are fantastic, don't get me wrong, but I just wonder what's gone into the background of it in order that we can approve this.
Billy?
There's no policy justification now for requesting a business plan, so there's no reason that they should have submitted a business plan. I can't answer for what research they may or may not have done in terms of market research or whatever.
That's an interesting reply. David? Or do you want to come back, Patsy?
I'm just wondering, as a committee, how we justify something like this if we don't have any business reasons to do so. It's quite it's all about development in the country. You've got to have, if it's an agricultural house, you've got to have reasons why you need we've got it coming later, why you need a house in an area. It's to look after certain sheep, cattle, whatever else it might be, but this does not require anything, which I find extraordinary.
Is that a statement just, or is it a question again? I'll ask David maybe to help you, but you know.
And that is the policy position. Basically, if you have a house in the countryside, because there tends to be a lot more demand for houses than there are for new businesses, there's a different set of policies, different criteria. But really, I would address you to paragraph 4.5 on page 64, which really sets out the key policies on this. Billy is right, there is not a business plan justification that's required. Obviously, if the business plan then doesn't stack up, it doesn't happen. Whereas if you had a house, there's quite a lot of demand for houses, which would go on. Whereas this one here is obviously it's come forward from the individual applicant. As Billy said, we think it is a very novel design. And our concern with the previous application was we didn't have anything to demonstrate that the design was going to be exemplary. It wasn't going to have an adverse effect, but that's why unusually we've actually accepted the approval of the design at this stage for a planning permission in principle. That's unusual, but here we feel it is important to actually capture that. So this is actually what would be effectively granted permission, because it is, I think, quite an exemplary design.
David?
Thank you. I have two questions. First one is just about this dual carriageway. Is that a pedestrian dual carriageway with the people being parked at the bottom, or is it a drop-off type scenario? Or?
As proposed in the supporting submission, the proposal would be for an access road to the site up the hill as per the existing track. Sorry, that's as it is now. So you would enter the site at that existing access. There would be a car parking area just to the right of the access there at the bottom of the hill, so just behind that hedge. The vehicles would access the site up that hill. There would be, by a 3-metre wide track, there would be a 2-metre wide pedestrian track formed to the right of that existing track that you see there. And then there would be a new track formed, again a 3-metre wide track, on the other side of the double fence and hedge that you see there. And that would bring vehicles back down the hill, and that would then curve round to join up with the car park and the access again. I'll take you back to the... So that would be the proposed layout. The supporting submissions indicate that the expectation would be that vehicles would park at the bottom of the hill and people would walk up the hill towards the site. Now, there is quite considerable reference and analysis of that in the report, and for that we continue to have some concerns about that indicative proposal, and for that reason, details of that, I think we actually refer in the report that arrangement needs to be reconsidered, but details of that would not be approved at this stage. That is indicative only at this stage. That would be a matter to be considered in detail at the further application stage. It's also worth noting that the landscape architect made comments of that as well. I mean, the feeling is that it may be unnecessary to introduce another track, which in itself would have quite a significant visual impact. And that's perhaps the reason why I included that slide from 2014 which showed the track to indicate how prominent it would be when recently formed. However, it's also fair to say that you can see that in the 3 years since the 2014 photograph, it has grown over. So, you know, depending on what the proposals for surfacing are, it can be made in such a way that it would be less prominent. But whether there's actually a genuine need for a second track, we would question that, and for that reason, the recommended conditions would require detail of that to be proposed at the further application stage.
You're a second point, David.
I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. I was still on the first one here. So I think we're looking at 3 proposed tracks, 2 vehicular and 1 pedestrian at this stage. And could there be a proposal coming in the later phases for parking at the top?
Can't speculate on what might or might not be submitted. Technically, the answer is yes, they could propose that, but that would have to be considered at that time.
And my second point is that Mr. Sooty said that that if the business plan fails, then it does not happen. I think probably this would happen, and then it may or may not fail. It might fail because that's a very infrequently used road there, and people might have to walk up, which is not what everybody wants to do these days. And I just wondered, is the design such that it would lend itself to being a house in the future? And given your experience, what's the odds that it would then have it would gain a change of use if it failed as a business?
Remember, we're dealing with the application in front of us. Billy?
Yes, I think the chairman's answered your question. I can't speculate on what might or might not come forward in the future, nor would I be prepared to speculate on the suitability of the proposed design as a house.
No, but you've been in this game a lot longer than I, and you may well have seen items coming up for changes of use. And I just wondered, when a business fails, but there's the existing building, do they usually then get their change of use, or is that uncommon? Or
again, I can't answer that question. I can only answer direct questions on the proposal that is before you now.
And we need to be careful we're not speculating, because it's no helpful, and we have a proposal which we'll either support or we'll no. Andrew?
Thanks, Chair. My question was on parking, and is there any Is there anything in the current proposals for disabled parking up at the top? Because it's quite a trek for someone who's not quite...
Yes, the indicative proposals do show disabled parking at the top of the hill.
Okay, if there are no other questions for the case officer, we're now in session. If there are no alternative proposals, do we go with the officer's recommendation? Patsy?
Have anything? I just wonder if we see it coming back. It's quite an interesting proposal, or does everything get done under delegated powers?
As usual, you can ask for it to come back again, but it would only be reserved matters because we're agreeing the design today. Billy, do you want to comment on that for Patsy? Would it be what would be bringing back that we've not agreed today?
I think you've answered the question, Chair. It would only be reserved matters. Again, whether or not it comes back to committee would be dependent on circumstances at the time.
I'll get David to help us as well.
Chair, yes, just to try and assist. Basically, you can, as you've done quite regularly recently as a committee, request that any application for planning permission in principle comes back before yourselves. That's not a problem. Just drawing your attention to page 67, the only matters which are effectively reserved now are the layout. Now that does include things such as all roads, footpaths and car parking. External appearance, so we're wanting the details of the materials that are going to be proposed and used, and landscaping. So it's only really those three things that would come back before yourselves.
Is the general design in question of the building itself at the moment? Because to me it looks a bit like a flying saucer. I'm not sure it's appropriate for that particular location.
Sorry. If you're not content with that, you'd have to put forward an alternative proposal or indeed propose that we refuse the application.
I wasn't sure whether that was what was before us, if the overall design of the, or was just the principle.
No, it's because the design's so innovative that we're including it as part of the approval today, and we're only left with landscape and roads, etc., to be dealt with by delegate.
Okay, so an alternative proposal is I think we should reject the basic design of the property because it's such a prominent position.
Okay, do you have a seconder for that? If you don't, then if there are any alternative, Patsy, you'll second it. So you're proposing it's refused on the basis that the design isn't appropriate for the location. Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're agreeing with, Patsy? Okay, so you have a proposal to reject the application. Are there any alternative proposals, Andrew? And then John and Elaine.
I would like to propose that we go with the recommendations.
Okay, John?
Just to second that.
Elaine? Okay. Nick, can you deal with that, please?
Thank you, Chair. So we have a motion which is to refuse approval on the basis of the design's inappropriate for the site. The amendment being to agree the proposal in line with the officer's recommendations. So, Councillor Dempster?
Amendment.
Councillor John Campbell?
Amendment.
Councillor Blake has left. Councillor Doogie Campbell?
Amendment.
Councillor Gilroy? Councillor Giusti?
Amendment.
Councillor James? Councillor Martin?
Amendment.
Councillor McComb?
Amendment.
Councillor McKee?
Amendment.
Councillor Murray?
Amendment.
Councillor Young?
Amendment.
So voting in favour of the motion were 2 members, and voting in favour of the amendment we have 9, so the amendment is carried.
And the application is approved as set out in the report. We come to agenda item number 10, erection of dwelling house at Lower Albie Farm, WATERBECK, LOCKERBIE. The application type is planning permission in principle. The applicant, Mrs. Lowther, reference 17/1098/PIP. The recommendation is to refuse, and the case officer is Iona Brooke. Iona, would you like to take us through your presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair. Under the scheme of delegation, this application has been called before you today by an elected member who thought the proposal should be subject to the scrutiny of yourselves. The application is for a new dwelling house in the countryside. As the application site lies out with any identified settlement, in order for it to be considered favourably, the proposal must comply with criteria set out in the policy. It cannot be, as shown here, it cannot be considered under policy H2, which considers houses in the villages, because it lies out with the settlement of WATERBECK. Therefore, it has to be considered under policy H3. In this instance, the site is not associated with any small building group. It is not going to see the beneficial redevelopment of brownfield site. It is not a replacement dwelling, and it is not a conversion of an existing traditional building. The applicant in this instance has, however, submitted information claiming that there is an essential for the need of an agricultural worker at this site, and the need cannot be met in any other settlement. In terms of the site itself, it is an... Oh, sorry, let's go back. The site is currently part of a green field. It's improved grassland. It is remote from all other development with limited natural boundaries. Typically, farmhouses would be situated in close proximity to associated outbuildings, which in planning terms are preferable as they would be viewed in context of such. Despite outbuildings being under the ownership of the applicant, however, in this instance, and in close vicinity to their site, he has chosen to pick this site for the development of our dwelling house. And it is a relatively open nature, as you can see. This is the view looking south, the view looking east, the view looking west of the site, and this is from the access road of the site towards WATERBECK itself. This is a view from the access road, the B722. The applicant states in this instance there is an essential need for residential accommodation on the site. And whilst it is accepted that a certain level of accommodation on site could be desirable for security and animal welfare purposes, in this instance it is the preference of the applicant to provide accommodation for an agricultural worker here. And as detailed in supplementary guidance, personal preferences and circumstances are not material considerations. It is not uncommon for farmers or workers to have areas of land which are under their control but are remote from the accommodation where they reside. And in this instance, the applicant has failed to provide sufficient evidence as to why alternate accommodation cannot be secured within the vicinity for an agricultural worker. As you will see from this slide here, currently the applicant resides in a property at the northwest of his holding. And this area here is where the existing agricultural buildings that relate to the holding are. And this is the application site, so you can see it's remote from all other buildings pertaining to the actual unit. Supplementary guidance also indicates the need for a dwelling must not result as the result of a severance of a house from the agricultural holding within a 10-year period. It would appear that this land at some point was associated with ALBIE farm here itself and has been severed, but we're not sure when that was actually severed from the host dwelling, the original dwelling. In operational terms, the applicant's house, which is here, has been occupied in operational terms to the agricultural building, and this proposal represents severance to the holding itself. It has not been clearly demonstrated that the new dwelling at this location is essential for the needs of the agricultural operations, and therefore the proposal is contrary to policy H3 and is recommended that it is refused. Thank you.
Thanks, Iona. Do any members have any questions for the case officer? Elaine.
Yeah, it's really more of a point of clarification because I obviously misunderstood. That I thought that applications could only be called in by councillors who are not members of the Planning Applications Committee. Am I right?
No, anyone can call it in, but okay. Then the caller in can, well, they actually can, they can sit on the committee at the same time and determine. Would you just confirm that, David?
Yes, that's correct. Under the scheme of delegation, it was amended a couple of years ago to, used to originally be, it was only ward members could call something in their ward. That was then amended that any member can call in any application anywhere. It doesn't matter whether you're in Planning Applications Committee or not. The only issue would be for a member of Planning Applications Committee was if they prejudged in their comments, they'd predetermined it. In other words, I think this should be approved because whatever reason. That clearly means that you wouldn't be able to sit in on the meeting. But Councillor Dryburgh's wording here is obviously quite cleverly worded. It hasn't given any indication of his view at that stage, so it's quite justified for him to call it.
Thanks, Elaine. So if there are no questions for the case officer, we'll go into session now. If there are no proposals being put forward, we go with the officer's recommendation. Unanimous agreement, okay. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes the business for today. Thank you very much for attendance.